So I appreciate everybody coming back promptly after lunch or break or whatever that was. The group of folks that we have here is it's a really unique skill set. I'll get into that in a second when I ask them to do intros. So as I'm sure everybody in this room knows, CTV viewership is at an all-time high, and the hockey stick continues up and to the right. So although traditional media executions by pharma brands over the last few decades have relied heavily on linear TV, you may be surprised to learn that the entire US pharma ad market is about $15 billion in spend. More than half of that is now digital, right? And as marketers have continued to diversify ad spend, the largest media companies, some of which are represented here, these guys have also been hard at work evolving their capabilities. So today with Elsa, Elsa, Brendan, and Dan, we're going to dive into unification as a theme. These guys have a very unique perspective. Some of the topics we're going to cover you haven't heard of in the prior sessions. The folks here represent, they do a ton of data-driven linear. They do a ton, so market leadership in addressable. All of them work in CTV specifically, and there's also deep programmatic experience, right? So we're checking a lot of the really important boxes. We're not just going to focus this session specifically on CTV. Based on their experience, we're going to talk sort of broadly about convergence, but then we're going to hone in. We're going to start to get deeper into CTV. So before we get into, and by the way, there's a lot of deep sort of analytics background on the stage here. So if you guys come from that mindset, save your questions. We're
going to talk about Bayesian modeling in the second half of the program. First joke of the day.
So before we get into that, I'd love if you guys, in layman's terms, could explain what exactly you do, right? So we've got the bulk of the audience here comes from agency holding companies. Everybody here is sort of focused on pharma. So we got agency holding companies, we have large independents, agencies represented, we have small independents represented, and we have manufacturers and brands represented. So how would you articulate what it is that you guys do within your organizations that'd be helpful for them to understand before we jump in? Elsa, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll start with my title and then go into what exactly that means. So my name, again, is Elsa Blumberg. I'm AVP of Client Analytics and Insights for DirecTV. Basically, the group that I run is kind of a catch-all for all things research related. My primary areas of focus are marketplace intelligence, consumer intelligence, and insights. My team leverages things like syndicated data that you're all familiar with, but we also mine our first-party data, and we do that for the purposes of thought leadership to provide insights for our clients before going to campaign, and after a campaign has already come to an end. We provide, the overall narrative, how that campaign performed. And that's all done for addressable television as well as addressable digital.
Hi, I'm Brendan Garrone. I lead our programmatic sales and partnerships team. So my team's responsible for working with anybody who's leveraging automation to purchase streaming inventory across the NBCU portfolio, inclusive of Peacock. And so that can be with the large holding companies, advertisers directly, mid-market independent brands, as well as sort of working with our DSPs like DeepIntent.
Got it. Great. Dan Aversano, I feel like I'm sitting at an awkward angle, looking squarely at this group here. So in the side box, I'm your guy today. You're stuck with me. So I oversee a couple of things at TelevisaUnivision. So first off, for those of you who don't know, TelevisaUnivision, world's largest Spanish language media company. We distribute content really across the globe, but Spanish language that's our mojo. My role there is a little bit unique, so I oversee all of our ad operations teams. So think of that, any piece of technology, data, infrastructure that we use to get an ad to glass, that typically falls in part of my group. And then the other piece is around our advanced advertising products. So that's pretty much everything that is not your standard basic run-of-the-mill 15, 30-second spot that runs in TV. That could be data-driven targeting for linear, for digital, cross-platform, alternative currency, advanced ad formats, interactive ads, choice-based ads, and whatever other shit we make us smart.
All right, so lots of brain power here. So we're going to start with sort of general themes, and then we're going to sort of work our way down. So first question for the group, what's your company's approach to TV convergence, and how does it align with the changing media landscape? specifically, you guys all have both linear and digital under your purviews, right? How are you adapting from a traditional reach and demo-based model of doing business to a more targeted, data-driven approach on scaled endpoints now, like a CTV? So whoever wants to jump in.
I'll start. Yeah. So I think a lot of us have probably seen the statistics around the shift to streaming in terms of consumption. I think it's something like 50% of video consumption is now, on streaming, expected to rise to around 70. For like an NBC stat, we have a show like, Below Deck is about 55 linear, 45 streaming. And so the company is obviously tasked with how do we continue to drive value for our marketers now that we're playing in both spaces and will be playing in both spaces for some time. And so for NBC, we came up with one platform, which is essentially the transaction model designed to make it easier to buy across screens and platforms against an advanced audience. And so we have a significant amount of scale at the company. We have about 227 million people that we're reaching on a monthly basis. 95% of that is on a TV screen. And so how do we get more thoughtful and prescriptive about leveraging and unlocking what CTV provides for us, namely around advanced audience targeting? And so one platform is designed, again, with our marketers in mind to make it easier to buy all of this together.
I can jump in as well. So, I agree with everything Brandon said. Everyone's familiar with what's happening with the changing landscape. From an addressable perspective, addressable really has its roots in data and tech, right? So we work with our partners to identify the right audience that will yield the best results for our clients. And we're able to find that audience across both our premium linear and CTV inventory.
I think all valid points. I guess a couple things that I would add. Look, we're all chasing a very, very fickle consumer. A consumer that wants to consume content on their time, when they want, where they want. And as producers of content, right, we're all putting content in more places than we've ever put it. And that creates complications. So the word that I heard there that's really important is easy. The first thing is we need to make all of this complication much, much easier. Right? I kind of described it as putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. You used to have Friends on Thursday night, 75 million people would tune into it. Any one of you could buy one commercial, talk to 75 million people in 30 seconds. You know how hard it is to talk to 75 million people in 30 seconds right now? It's hard, unless you're buying a spot in the Super Bowl, which I think is the last thing out there that can actually do that, right? You need to piece things back together. So that first point is around aggregation. How do we make it easy to combine all of that fragmented viewing, all that fragmented distribution with common data, common analytics, common measurement, and hopefully one day some semblance of common compliance and privacy across it. And then the other piece is precision, right? So we want to pull all that supply back together, make it easy to buy, but now we want you to be able to address it with data to inform and be as precise as humanly possible to put an ad in front of who you want and when you want. And be able to do that where you understand duplication between all those pieces, and most importantly, can control it, right? You don't, for anyone who's had a horrible experience in CTV, where you open up an app and you see maybe an insurance ad 17 times in 40 minutes of streaming, that sucks. It sucks for you, it sucks for the advertiser, it sucks for the media company. But believe it or not, there's actually a bunch of reasons why that happens. And more often than not, it comes back to technology, data, compliance, privacy, blah, blah, blah. So precision and aggregation.
All the pieces of the ecosystem have to sort of start to talk together. So we're getting to a moment in time where it seems like CTV's moment has arrived, right? This year, this category, the folks that are in this room represent roughly, this year will represent about $1 billion in media spend, right? So $1 billion in CTV out of a total pie of about 15 billion. So when you look at that number, 3-4 years ago, that number was almost zero for this category, right? So it's one of the fastest growing. Second fastest growing category is programmatic, and you got those folks represented here too. So how do you guys think, and given that your roles are not just pharma, you work across multiple industries, how do you think convergence benefits the folks that are here? Their organizations may traditionally have prioritized linear TV over something like a CTV, but now they're very aggressively starting to embrace CTV. So I guess how would you answer that question? How does convergence benefit traditionally linear buyers who are now embracing CTV?
I can take that one.
Yeah, go.
I think to answer that, you really have to understand what's happening in the overall like landscape, right? If you consider in an average quarter, national linear television has the opportunity or the potential to reach 80% of all people in the U.S. When you look at, ad spending in a typical quarter, you have, a little bit over 6,000 brands that spend in an average quarter. On average, they're spending, $2.5 million? That $2.5 million will get you 20% reach. So that's 20 out of the 80, leaving a big gap of potential reach that was unrealized. To make that more meaningful, you want to trim that back a little bit, right? You look at the top 250 advertisers. They're spending somewhere in the ballpark of $42, $45 million, and they're maxing out their reach at 45%. Again, leaving a big bucket in which to fill. And then I'll even take it a step further and say, if you look at the top 10 advertisers, they're spending upwards of $175 million a quarter. You have advertisers spending over $200 million a quarter, and they're maxing out their reach at about 60%. Right? So it's really key to understand the difference between potential reach and actual reach. Now with linear, we have the ability to go and to target those unreached viewers because we're not beholden to a media schedule. We can find viewers wherever, whenever they're watching linear television. But then the important part to consider is when you think about CTV. So if you do a Venn diagram in your mind and you look at CTV, national linear television, and the overlap, there are about 70% of people in the U.S. watch both. But you have 15% on either side that are exclusive to that platform. So when it comes to really maximizing reach and controlling for frequency, you need both. You need linear television, which, addressable definitely helps get you to your full potential reach, but you also need CTV in order to, realize the full scope of the platforms.
Got it.
Yeah, I would just say, you kind of touched on it already, but CTV unlocks this value, of course, it's because it's addressable, right? And when I say addressable, I mean it in the broadest sense. You're able to target on a one-to-one basis rather than something like a data-driven linear where it's a one-to-many across national linear television. And so it creates this sandbox essentially where you're able to test both addressable demo segments, advanced pharmaceutical industry segments that everyone, I think, collectively is starting to explore and lean into. And so it leads to this like personalization at scale. And then again, because of the unlocking of like digital functionality, you can tie in measurement to that, right? So you can measure in this industry as close to real time as we can get, right? And then optimize because you're getting that feedback loop from digitally powered CTV. So it again it's a little bit of a new frontier where I know a lot of our advertisers are testing disparate tactics quarter over quarter because they're still viewing it as a must-have in terms of, to your point, the clear fact of just the consumption. There is incremental reach there. I think we all know that now. But then how do we take that a step further and think about personalization and leveraging of audiences? I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Look, the only thing I would add is there's an efficacy and efficiency component. That's important. Price matters, and if it doesn't, come see me after. I can sell you whatever you want at any price you want. But look, there really is like CPMs exist for a reason. It's an equivalized metric. It's an important one. So yes, I think it does make sense, and there's a lot of great things about CTV. But look, the beauty of CTV and linear together, I do think there are paths of efficiency where they work very well together, especially given the precision you have in CTV where you can take and learn and then extend into things like DDL where you can probably get more efficient pricing and use those things in conjunction. Bottom line is anybody who's sitting in this room, you should not be thinking about one or the other. If you are, you're in the wrong business. These two things have to go hand in hand. You have to figure out how to leverage data to stretch across. Identity matters in both platforms. And look, I do think there are really smart tactics that we're seeing in use every day for this category as well as for other categories.
So Dan, both on the buy side and the sell side, there's these weird dynamics. It's almost like you said Humpty Dumpty, break it up and put it together again. On the buy side, historically, there have been linear teams and digital teams. Same happens within pharma, and you can slice that a bunch of different ways. On the sell side, it's the exact same thing where there's historically been linear teams and digital teams. Both sides have historically started to, over the last 5-10 years, started to sort of integrate. the other dynamic that the folks in this room deal with is, they've had HCP marketing campaigns and they've got patient marketing campaigns, and they're also like our most sophisticated clients are starting to integrate those things as well, right? So on your side, are you actually seeing, by the way, all this takes time, right? The processes have to be broken, leadership has to change and evolve, mindsets have to change, technology has to support it, et cetera. Are you guys seeing, specifically in pharma, true unified cross-platform buys today? Or is scale still way into the future?
I'm going to just jump in because, look, there is a great, I don't know if we have Preston in the room, but there's a great headline that I could throw out there about, yes, everything's cross-platform, it's great, unified CPMs, full fluidity, but most of that's bullshit. The reality is, no, it's not happening at scale. And there's really good reasons why CPMs in CTV tend to be higher. There's lower ad loads. It's a less cluttered environment. So if we want a truly fluid campaign where we can cross-clear everything, well, which CPM matters? I know which one I want. I want the higher one. I know which one you want. You want the lower one. So now we're negotiating that. There's also a realistic technology component, right? The way we move from order management to actual traffic, the way we move through stewardship, invoicing, and billing, that for the most part operates, whether you're on the buy side or the sell side, historically in two different sets of systems. And that is starting to change, but to overhaul an entire decisioning system, right? You have multiple ad servers in the addressable world. There's things like ad curatio, NVIDIA, Freewheel still operates in a big place. We use GAM internally. Those are just 3 different ways that we serve ads across our digital inventory, not to mention we traffic through legacy traffic systems like Wide Orbit. Long story short, there's a lot of different technology that needs to get figured out. It's starting to. I think the good news is there are little steps that we can all take right now, right? So we are pushing for more common data across, right? How do we stitch identity across and then build a linear campaign and a digital campaign that are informing one another? And there's ways to optimize that. But in terms of everything being single video centric, we're starting to organize people that way, the infrastructure, the technology, and to use the bad analogy that we were given the intro with, how the sausage is made, there's 2 different ways we make sausage right now. I don't know, if I'm being honest, there's probably 7 different ways. But
I do think there is this element in cross-platform specifically of not wanting to get perfect, get in the way of good.
100%.
Where there are clear incremental steps, no pun intended, that can be taken and you actually mentioned it, which is let's look at a single audience and let's leverage that audience not only across linear and digital environments, but also across, from the programmer standpoint, across multiple supply sources. And so probably a good plug for OpenAP, which is essentially a platform that is helping to provide cross-platform and cross-publisher activation, and then the commensurate insights and measurement that follows. So 1,000% correct, right? The world of perfect fluidity and parity pricing, not really here, but we do have large pharma clients that are continuing to lean into activating a single segment across screens, and they're continuing to lean into it because the performance is there and the measurement is there. So there definitely are, we're a ways away from perfection, but there are actually steps.
That's right. And what you said is spot on. The bar shouldn't be ever perfect. The bar just needs to be better. 5% better. What company doesn't kill for 5% better in anything? 5% better EBITDA, 5% profit revenue, 5% anything is great. So 5% better in terms of reach optimization, 5% better in terms of click-through rate, 5% better in terms of website visitation. That's real money for all of us.
Yep. So, Elsa, anything to add to that?
No, I 100% agree with you. What we're saying on the DirecTV side is the same thing. We definitely do activate on campaigns that are cross-platform with a unified target, but I would say it's definitely, for the pharmaceutical category, it's definitely lagging other categories. Just to kind of, leverage some of the marketplace intel that my team does. We surveyed the, 250 members of the ad community who work on pharma brands, and we found that 1/3 of them said that their buying and planning are complete for linear TV and CTV are completely separate, right? And so that's got to have a big impact as well. And that just speaks to everything that you were saying.
Yeah, so just to jump on that point, because and this is self-serving, I'll admit it, but look, the reality is I deal with that every single day, right? My networks, my company represents a very, very large portion of the population that is often overlooked, unfortunately, by many of the people in the room. when the fact is we over-index on virtually every single disease state, unfortunately, and it's just the massive disservice that's being done by not connecting with that audience, I kind of throw my arms up and say, look, forget US Hispanic, forget Spanish language for a second. Just use the data. Just use the data. And that data will tell you to spend more money here. So we champion that all the time about, look, just smartly thinking about how we use data for allocation, both for the planning and then the ultimate activation, whether it's across linear and CTV, whether it's across English language, Spanish language, the data will set you free.
So each of you guys, by the way, just for the audience, we're talking about billions of dollars being transacted across the universe that you represent, right? So let's switch topics a little bit to alternative currencies, right? So there's been a lot of work in the video ecosystem in the last year on this. Can you guys elaborate what your company specifically has been doing to support alternative currencies? And then what are some of the challenges that you guys are facing as these alternative currencies start to get deployed? Basically, said another way, what's the pain in your ass about alternative currencies? Or is there?
Alternative currencies are definitely a pain in the ass. But it's really important. So look, I'll start. Our point of view is a simple one. There are 3 reasons why we should all care about alternative currency. The first is around representation, right? The idea that we can leverage panels, again, that were built to measure Friends on Thursday night, are still somehow applicable given the fragmentation and diversity we see within this country. That is not true, and everyone admits that, including our friends at Nielsen. They will tell you that their panel is not as representative as their panel plus big data solution. Period, stop, end of sentence. Right? So that first, representation, really important. The second is you've seen this push in the last 10 years around how we leverage data for targeting. Right? So we're now talking about building smaller, more discrete segments. Again, really difficult to do that with just a panel. Right? You see a loss in fidelity. You also see through fragmentation, just in general, viewership has gotten smaller. If you look at the top 25 networks in cable, now versus 10 years ago, those ratings are decimated. They're like 1/10 of what they were. Again, really hard to measure that with a 40,000 household panel. And again, this isn't news, everyone agrees with that, right? So measuring smaller portions of the population, really, really important. You see a lot more fidelity, less variability. And last, and probably the piece that we talk most about, but again, I put on equal footing with those first 2, is cross-platform, right? We're talking about, the rise of CTV, where for the first time ever, we actually own first-party data that is really the only census-level data, right? We know every single device, for the most part, with fairly high degree of accuracy when they're consuming content or seeing ads in our ecosystems, right? You know everybody for Peacock, I know everybody for VIX, we have those counts, and it is census level, right? So the mechanism by which we can take that and integrate it with linear viewership, which there will never be census-level linear viewership. Everyone needs to get that word out of their head. ACR data, set-top box data is not census-level data. We've worked together for years, right? I've used DirecTV data to run media campaigns at Turner for years. It's not representative of the whole US. It's perfectly representative of DirecTV's footprint. And when you're buying addressable, that is the best way to measure it. Same thing when you're buying Peacock, his data is the best way to measure that. Buying VIX, best data to measure it. Again, second you get to TV, ACR set-top box, the biggest companies out there have 30, 40 million households. Does anyone know how many households are in the US? It's not 30 or 40 million, a lot more, right? So we're just talking about big panels. So again, the need for all currency, right? You need to ingest that big panel data, extrapolate it. Now you can start to use it to understand duplication with the census level digital data, right? So 3 reasons why it matters. Representation, most important in our opinion. Audience targeting, right? Measuring smaller audiences across the entire ecosystem, and cross-platform, the ability to dedupe that. Sorry that took longer than I wanted, but it's important for people to understand that we're not just doing it to create work. There's a real meaning behind it, and it is important. And where I started, yeah, it is a pain in the ass because it's a lot of work, but we have to do it if you're ever going to make sense of all this conversion.
Can I add one more thorn?
Yeah, please.
One more thorn to that is that I think people tend to conflate measurement and currency all the time. Two entirely different things, right? So I think for the pharma space, the measurement is actually very good, right? We leverage data from Crossix, we have IQVIA, Swoop, med data, all very strong, and that helps us find the right audiences. It helps us with our back-end attribution. That is not currency, right? How we transact, very different. Everything that Dan said is true. I agree with. I would say that the thing that makes alternative currencies difficult is just all the infrastructure that's involved and the change, the seismic change that would entail to, I guess, have alternative currencies at scale.
I mean, we were talking about this before, and it's an important point because I don't think people realize it, but we're already doing. I mean, you said it to me before. Like DDL is alt currency, and there's I don't know. I think at least $2 billion in this upfront that'll be DDL. So there's $2 billion in the upfront that will be transacted in alt currency.
Yeah, I think we've obviously been extremely vocal in this space, going back to our RFP process that Kelly Abkarian and co. have led at NBCUniversal, and we're working. We firmly believe in a multi-currency world. And we've worked to certify iSpot and Video Amp, and that's just going to happen on a rolling basis. At its simplest form, I guess, to me, is just the fact of we need to modernize measurement to account for the changes in viewership. Like that's the most simple aspect. So ratings are down. It's because the consumption has shifted, and we need to modernize and kind of have a technology-driven solution for more on-the-glass measurement that is able to account for the changes in the shifting in viewership. That seems kind of simple, but that's ultimately, I think, what we're looking to solve for. And I think to your point, right, currency is the counting, and we need to get to the counting and have the counting figured out first before we can talk about things like outcomes, which are down the road and something I think we're all collectively driving towards as an industry. But we kind of have to nail the counting of the eyeballs on the glass first as a first step.
So just quick show of hands, I'll use an industry acronym, and we won't do that much with this group. How many of you guys are familiar with the JIC? J-I-C, just quick show of hands.
It's hard to see.
Great, so very, very few people. So we're sort of at this important moment of collaboration. Chris talked about this at the opening, right? This important announcement happened a couple months ago. The JIC is basically a joint industry committee, and the goal is to focus on premium video currency in preparation for the 2024 upfronts, right? Just for context for everybody here, large amounts of money get transacted. This is sort of an important moment. So of the 5 national programmers who were involved in the creation of the JIC, 3 of them were here with us today, right? So you heard from Evan from Warner Brothers Discovery, Dan from Univision, and then NBCU, right? So given that the bulk of the audience here is not familiar with this topic, Dan, can you give us sort of a level 100 view of what exactly the JIC is about?
Yeah, so the JIC was started really with collaboration in mind, right? So all of the things I just talked about that make alt currency important, there's a lot of things underneath that make it really complicated. There's systems, there's technology, there's how and what data gets created and shared, how data gets collected. The JIC was started really with sort of 3 things in mind, right? One, how can we begin to speak as one voice to measurement companies as an industry, and it includes buy side and sell side. Here's the way that we think measurement should exist. Here are the standards that should exist around how we do measurement in this new ecosystem, right? That's important because historically, take a measurement company that comes to each one of us individually, we say very different things constantly. Now, all of a sudden, if we can collaborate and start to settle on a set of standards, now we're speaking with one voice, it's a lot easier to build requirements and specs to one set of needs. That's the first thing. The second thing is I think the most important, which is, I said it before, when you talk about CTV, the most accurate data for CTV consumption is our data. It is. It's the first time ever where media companies actually have the most accurate depiction of consumption of their content, right? So again, in Peacock more accurately than any third party ever will. So the JIC has been one of the most, again, important things it's working on is how do we take that actual first-party census-level streaming data, collect it, aggregate it, clean it, scale it, and get it ready in a way where we can hand it to third-party measurement companies who can integrate it into measurement, right? Because we think that's the best source of truth. Shouldn't be measuring CTV with a panel. That makes no sense. We have the data. Let us figure out how to collect it, aggregate it, clean it, and give it to you. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is a process by which we've set standards. We set a mechanism, where you can now, measurement companies can leverage and utilize this data. I'm sure there'll be a licensing component or something to that. However, The third piece is an audit, right? So, hey, you said you were going to do these things all this way. You said you're going to use the data that way. Is there some level of audit or certification that third party can say that, yes, this company is in compliance with what they said? That's the JIC in a nutshell. I want to be crystal clear. It is not the JIC or the MRC, right? For those of you who know the MRC, it's been an agency forever that all of us are a part of. Still an important part of the process. MRC accreditation matters. That's part of the requirements that the JIC has put out there. There's been a lot of confusion about that, so let's nip that right in the bud. MRC accreditation is different and important, but again, I think the JIC hopefully, through standardization and collaboration, can try to push alt currency through in a faster way.
Thanks, Dan. So lots of, so between OpenAP, the JIC, lots of sort of industry collaboration that's never really happened before. Some of that stuff is a ways into the future, right? And we talked about how some of the difficult pieces, gluing them together, we're not at the state of converged everything at scale yet, right? But there is opportunity in CTV as an endpoint today. And by the way, you guys might use modality, you might use endpoint, you might use channel. There's different ways of saying it, right? So for the folks in the audience here, what can the folks in the audience here do today to start ensuring that they are harnessing the power of CTV, like the power and the scale of CTV?
I mean, from my perspective, it's really quite simple, right? It's working very closely with your partners to define the goals of a campaign before the campaign launches and be really crystal clear of what those goals are. And then also before a campaign starts, it would be to really define what the KPIs are. What are your baselines for success? And I think that's pretty critical in setting up a successful CTV campaign. I mean, pretty simple, right?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think there's an aspect of focusing on the specific audience that you're looking to leverage, and kind of a little bit redundant, but having that be the source of truth for how you're looking at the video ecosystem. And I think that audience and that source of truth can be an iterative process and a test and learn process. And so one of the things that our advertisers who are doing, who are leveraging cross-platform effectively, is starting to think about optimization and advanced audiences in both linear and streaming. I do think there's a tendency to kind of stick with the status quo of buying linear and leave the innovation to CTV. And I think that makes perfect sense, right? From a lot of measurement and MMM and kind of the ways that linear has been bought. But our advertisers who have been really successful are also iterating both on the addressable TV space, but also in the national linear TV space, which we might not always think of innovation. But the data-driven linear business that we're doing, both from ourselves as a managed service as well as through a company like OpenAP, provides kind of the fluidity to do both on both platforms and environments.
Yeah, anything specific on CTV in terms of
look, I think they
harnessing the power?
I think they said it, but look, the reality is, I would almost, one, everybody needs to be buying CTV, and I think everybody knows that. But again, I would almost start to smartly think about starting with data, right? So the idea of here's the group of people, and obviously for the pharma category, that makes a ton of sense, right? You do have a very specific addressable audience that you should care about. And then I would ultimately start to do some high-level allocation between linear and digital and CTV. But I would think about those campaigns almost as one. While you can't dynamically optimize them, there's a lot of pre-work you can do to set up two separate campaigns, a CTV campaign and a data-driven linear campaign, and let them run side by side. And again, while you're not optimizing every single day, there's a lot of value in that. And certain pieces of it you can start to optimize. But again, I would start with data at the top and then let that, do some smart analytics around how you're allocating between the two. And ultimately, I think it provides better results for everybody.
I mean, thankfully for the folks in the room, the buy side are pretty much all DeepIntent clients. The planning aspect, sort of where it starts. Having been on both the buy side and the sell side, I think one of the things that I used to have anxiety about when I was on the sell side was attributes like campaign goals, how success is going to be measured, et cetera. Historically, a lot of that has been opaque to you guys, right? So it's kind of like you get the media investment, comes over the fence, you're like, all right, great, execute it. The folks in the audience here kind of operate the opposite of that, right? So one of the first questions when we first engage with the buy side here is tell us what you're trying to accomplish, literally at the audience level, at the campaign level, et cetera, right? So now sort of diving deeper a little bit into CTV specifically. If you have recent success stories, and you don't have to name clients, that's okay, but something that demonstrates the effectiveness of whatever approach your organization's taken. If you could share that with this group, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of like how we're leaning into it to drive results, part of the process of delivering CTV results for clients at scale has to do with our first-party data. Dan kind of touched on it, but and I liked your point about nobody knows the audiences better than us. Like NBC Unified has kind of been the engine that's powering a lot of our cross-platform capabilities. It's essentially our first-party data strategy and something that we've continued to evolve. And so the component of that is unifying people-based assets across all of NBCUniversal. I like to say emphasis on the universal. So all the disparate things that the company has and the assets under our purview. And then the second piece of that is how do we work with advertisers in a flexible way to activate against our data or activate against their data in a privacy compliant way. And so there was a whole panel on the topic of clean rooms, but NBC Unified Access is our focus and our product to say, let's onboard your audiences in a two-way street. We're bringing them over to activate them, to help plan, to provide insights into the behavior of those audiences on Peacock. But then there's the other direction, which is how do we also provide measurement in a privacy-safe way so that you can connect the dots in a 360 way. So I think the first-party data strategy has to be at the core of what we as a programmer can do to activate on a lot of these things.
Got it.
I have one scenario or one case study that comes to mind. I can't share the name of the brand, but recently we worked with a brand who wanted to be part of a high-profile sporting event, right? But they didn't necessarily have the budget. Actually running in that event would have eaten their budget for the entire year. So we worked with them to identify the viewers to that event, right? So we created an addressable target of those viewers and then found them throughout a 24-hour period, wherever they were watching television, and served them the ad. We also, in conjunction, ran a pause ad with the same unified target. So because of that, activation, we were really able to deliver results for the client that they were pleased with, because they did it, at a fraction of the cost had they actually, run in the sporting event to begin with.
Got it. So alternative to big tentpole.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Yep. When you're budget constrained.
Excuse me. So a couple of things. So one of the things that we found is most third-party data sets significantly underrepresent U.S. Hispanics. It's a big challenge, something that we've worked to solve. So we've stood up a household ID graph. It's, we think, the world's largest, most accurate U.S. Hispanic household ID graph, north of 92% coverage, north of 90% accuracy. We make that data available. So big bucket of success we've seen is literally working with, whether it's in pharma or outside of pharma, leveraging our data to truly find U.S. Hispanics in most places where you would not expect to find them. We've seen a ton of success around that, and it's solving a data fidelity issue. The other piece is around cross-platform optimization. So we've built some interesting analytics that allow you to modulate reach and frequency across CTV and linear. Our audience is one of the most naturally organic cross-platform audiences you'll ever see. Throughout any single day, they interact with us across local television stations, national television stations, radio, digital audio, CTV, and again, often it's all of those in a single day. So the ability to understand sort of who you're reaching, when you're reaching, we think is really high, right? We don't have fundamentally different audiences in our CTV ecosystem and our linear ecosystem. So modulating weekly reach and frequency is important. Again, we built some really cool analytics where we can start with your linear TV schedule and literally forecast on top of our ID graph which IDs are expected to see which ad on which day for the coming week. And then we can target or suppress so that we maximize your weekly reach and frequency. We've seen massive gains, like double-digit % gains in modulating that weekly reach number, so that, again, you're maximizing reach against a specific audience segment. So, again, two things, one on data fidelity and the second just on better reach and frequency control.
Cool, thank you. So we're going to switch gears for sort of one last time to something that you guys are all in the midst of right now, which is new fronts, upfronts, right? So for the folks that are in the audience here, talk about some of the major changes that you're seeing in this year's cycle, specifically related to CTV and or programmatic.
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, so there's a lot. But speaking specifically from the programmatic side, I think we've felt that programmatic is continuing to take center stage in a lot of the conversations. And what I mean by that is, historically, you would kind of go to me and Dan's companies and the other, broadcasters and programmers, and the video investment teams would talk to, our teams and schedule an upfront, come trade volume and price. And then programmatic was sort of sitting outside of that, potentially for a reach play, a test and learn, a sandbox, an advanced audience play. What we're seeing now is that the upfront still exists. The method of transaction is what is starting to change. And so we're still trading volume for price. We're still having the conversations with our partners, but there is a drive to go from a more static to a more automated and dynamic method of purchasing CTV specifically. And I guess the last thing I'll say is CTV really is starting to take the center stage in leading a lot of the conversations for investments, where brands are starting to continue to think about CTV in a lot of the ways that they're thinking about linear. What I mean by that is CTV is very fragmented. I think we all know about that. When you kind of cut through some of the UGC and maybe the less premium and long tail, it's a very finite amount of premium CTV supply. And I think the industry is starting to kind of collectively realize that and going straight to the source of the content manufacturers.
Got it. How about for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, look, the upfront, I think you hit a couple of good points there. CTV is a real part of the upfront. Programmatic is a real part of the upfront. It used to be that premium publishers were very afraid of programmatic, and we equated it very quickly with RTB, a race to the bottom. Finally, I think that's been proven wrong. And I think, look, I can tell you from the TelevisaUnivision side, we're agnostic to how people want to transact, whether that's through PMPs or PGs, whether that's through direct IOs, whether that's linear digital. We want investment in both, right? So I think one of the unique things is we're still growing linear, which is like crazy to say, but like our over-the-air consumption is actually growing. So I think one of the challenges that we see in this upfront is CTV is a big part of what we're talking about. But for those of you who are going to the events next week, 90% of the conversation, I think you're right, is going to be about CTV in those presentations. For ours, we got to do 50-50. We still have to talk about linear because it's still growing. We have a ton of supply. So for us, back to that cross-platform point, it is really important. And the alt-currency dialogue is really big for us. And it's certainly big from a cross-platform standpoint, but even from linear. I'm sure some of you have read, but there's an ongoing discussion and debate right now about Nielsen panel only or Nielsen panel plus big data. That is an ongoing discussion. I can tell you our point of view, Nielsen panel plus big data has to be the currency. Our audience has been undercounted for 70 years. Finally, we have Nielsen standing up and saying, yeah, you're right, it's undercounted. We want to transact that way. So currency, whether it's linear only, whether it's CTV, whether it's cross-platform, that's a big part of the dialogue. And I was talking about this with somebody the other day, a lot of us who have worked in and around, whether it's data or programmatic or research, this is the time of year where you usually were in the background. This is like center stage right now. It is arguably one of the most important topics in the industry today, which on one hand is exciting. Back to what I said before, it is a giant pain in the ass. It used to be nice. Like I knew by July 4th I was on the beach.
Yep.
Now it's,
Stays
we
over.
don't know.
Yep. So Elsa, you guys are doing, I think this is the first year you guys have done upfronts, new fronts, et cetera, right? So can you talk about how your approach and how it's gone so far?
Yeah, what we're hearing from the marketplace is a renewed focus on reach optimization and frequency management. And because DirecTV, our products don't overlap, right? We have DirecTV linear, addressable, and then we have DirecTV stream. People don't have both, so there's a naturally no overlap. So we're able to really optimize reach within our footprint and control for frequency. So that's what we've been doing and hearing a lot in market since the new fronts. I would say the big gap and challenge is everything that Dan said, right? You have this broader ecosystem, and how do you then determine your duplication across a holistic media buy, inclusive of search, inclusive of social, inclusive of radio, television, everything, the whole thing, that is very difficult. And that's that what I say. I would say that's the biggest challenge.
So for the programmer side, lots of endpoints, lots of moving pieces. The pieces of the puzzle, generally we're starting to see how the pieces will come together over time, but still ton of opportunity in what's here in front of us today, right? I think that's fair to say for all of you guys. So for the pharma marketers in the crowd, before we switch to them asking you guys questions, if you guys each had one thing that you wanted to ask of the crew here, what would be the thing that you would ask them for?
I'll start and probably be bold, and at some point someone in my peer group will yell at me for this, but stop overlooking our audience. U.S. Hispanics are growing. They're important. They're important to your business. And it's also socially the right thing to do. This is an underinformed audience because the level of advertising, the level of communication, level of marketing to them about very important, realistic, real healthcare topics, they just don't get it. And that's not good for our audience. It's certainly not good for our business. I don't think it's good for your business.
Got it. Brendan?
I think that the multi-platform world between linear and digital is going to be a thing for a very, very long time. And I would urge both buyers and sellers to take a stake in and help drive and push the ball forward, even though it's pretty difficult, I think, and challenging for a multi-platform world. And when I say multi-platform, again, I mean linear and CTV. Again, do not let perfect get in the way of good. There are incremental steps in progress that can be taken. CTV unlocks a lot of those steps, but in general, I do think there are things that can be done right now rather than waiting for a day that's going to be very far in the future, if ever, where linear is or CTV is just one thing. We're going to be having a toe in both ponds for the foreseeable future. I think we all kind of need to make that work collectively.
Got it. Elsa, how about you?
Now I would echo that and say at least for linear addressable, it's an NCTV. They're necessary complements. It's not an option, but they're necessary complements to national linear television if you want to optimize your media schedule.
Got it. So don't wait is the net.
And buy more Spanish language
media. And do that. All right. Can we switch to let's switch to Q&A if folks have questions in the audience. You guys ready?
Yeah, I can't see anyone really. I can see this side better, but.
Any questions? Jury? No?
That is a jury, but I just realized that.
No?
Yeah,
No, 'cause there's got to be some question.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh.
There we go.
So, personally, I feel like the targeting side of it is covered. Doing a good job utilizing your own data, utilizing third parties to target farm space, C or H. But from a measurement standpoint, given so many things, in this case, say patients, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, how is anyone going to get back to what was the thing or things that created doctor visit or the conversion to the category or the conversion to the brand? Where's that work to really truly say, these were the things that worked, the things that didn't, this was the primary thing that worked?
Yeah, I'll start, and I'm going to pull it out of pharma for a second because I don't think that's a unique problem for pharma. I think causality is the hardest thing in the world to prove for anything, right? Particularly when it comes to advertising. So if you think about sort of the advertising ecosystem today, we've all chased causality in every single ad category. I think at times we've chased perfect, which is how do I know that this person walked into this Target, picked up that brand off aisle 2, second shelf, went down and plunked down their Amex and bought it. But if you really trace that back, there actually are lots of signals along the way that get you there, right? So I think that's one thing that we need to think about. So I can tell you for other categories, we've done a lot around understanding search volume and search engagement. So through companies like EDO, we've stood up optimizations where we forecast things like web search engagement based on linear TV ad exposure. So yeah, it's not actually going and filling a script and consuming the medicine, but it's a pretty good start. So I would say that's where we've seen most success is certain categories. Yeah, we can get really deep down and granular, but then even there you have like correlation not being causation, so it's never going to be perfect. I come back to causality always will be the hardest thing to prove, especially in a highly fragmented ad ecosystem, but there are definite things that can be done and signals all along that consumer journey that matter. And I think that's where when partnering with media partners, and unfortunately more than one, but you can get the right ad exposure, which is largely what we can bring to the table with a ton of precision. And then it's just a matter of figuring out which signals are most indicative of the KPIs you care about most. And we figure out ways to pull them together. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump on that.
I mean, I can jump in from the DeepIntent standpoint. I think, out of that $15 billion pie that we talked about, DeepIntent's, I guess, legacy and the strongest point of differentiation starts in that programmatic pie, right? Our approach, and others from DeepIntent, if you guys want to chime in, our approach is on audience creation, audience segmentation, media optimization, delivery, et cetera, outcomes, all those things. Those are all things that we've historically been very, very strong in the programmatic bucket. The realization that we had over the past year was if you were to draw a line, a continuum between the buy side and the sell side, historically, the bulk of our tools were geared towards equipping the buy side, right? That's only solving one part of the equation. So our go forward, and Chris talked about this in terms of that operating system, is basically how do we decouple elements of the things that we've already built specifically for programmatic, and then start to, unless we also start to equip folks like Univision, NBCU, and DirecTV and others in the ecosystem on the sell side, only half of the equation is solved, right? So decoupling our solutions and making them available both to the buy side and the sell side. Both sides will transact with it in different ways. But again, the expertise that we've built in programmatic over the last 7 years, we've essentially of the pie. Chris is here; he'll laugh at this. When I first started talking to Chris, I told him, I said, "Dude, you picked a huge pie to play in, which was the $15 billion pie, but you picked the smallest pie with the highest level of difficulty, right? Now it's like if you extract yourself from that and now start to apply that goodness onto others, that's where these things start to come together. So from our most sophisticated clients, what they're looking for is a singular view, not just a view on programmatic, right? So a lot of our work over the past 6 months, a year, has been sort of evolving out of program, or in addition to programmatic, being able to go deeper into things like CTV.
So if you want higher ROI, leverage the DeepIntent data and platform, and buy more Spanish language media. 2 things.
There you go.
Sorry. You get enough.
We have Telemundo.
He's got Telemundo. There you go.
We're buddies.
There you go. All right. Any other questions? Great question, by the way. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great.
everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody.